thanks for joining everybody. My name is Greg Kaiser, Senior Vice President at ITM. And today's webinar, we're going to be covering the 5 biggest mistakes that TOLI trustees make and how to fix them. Joined on this webinar today is Hanson, who is our Director of Remediation. So just some kind of quick announcements. We will have a post-event survey. If you have a quick minute, please fill out that survey. We greatly appreciate your feedback. Within a day or so, you should receive an email with the recording of this webinar, a PDF of our presentation materials, and a certificate of completion, as we got 1.25 CTFA CE credits approved with the American Bankers Association. Just going through the agenda quick, I'll cover an ITM introduction, and then I'm going to hand things over to Hanson, who will cover the TOLI stats and background and walk you through the 5 biggest mistakes TOLI trustees make and how to fix them. With a little bit of luck, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So if you do have a question, feel free to submit it, and we'll try to get it answered at the end of the webinar. A little bit about ITM. Most of you are probably familiar with us, but ITM stands for Insurance Trust Monitor, and we are the nation leading provider for trust-owned life insurance solutions, and we have a team of independent life insurance experts. We've been around for over 23 years, so quite the track record that we're proud of. And it should just be noted that we don't market or sell insurance of any kind, maintaining our independence. A little bit of look by the numbers. We do partner with over 300 banks and trust companies. We manage the ongoing performance of over 25,000 life insurance policies held in trust, and our team continues to grow with over 175 team members. Just to kind of give a quick overview of the solutions that we offer here at ITM. With relation to trust-owned life insurance, we do everything from policy reviews to a full outsourced solution where you can leverage our team of trust administrators and life insurance experts performing the policy reviews and remediation. We also have a team of qualified appraisers that perform closely held business valuations. So some of you may not be familiar with that, but we do perform closely held business valuations for any business that's held in a trust or IRA account. We've seen more and more regulators requiring updated fair market values. We partner with over 75 trust organizations performing those valuations, and we also perform formal appraisal work. So really think about ITM the next time you need a business valuation. Lastly, we do have a will file platform. So this is a database that we have that helps you organize your will file. You can have customized reporting, and it also includes death audit sweeps. Our sister company, Life Insurance Trust Company, provides successor trustee services. Many trust organizations have looked to right-size their ILIT portfolio, perhaps wanting to remove themselves as trustee for any standalone or non-meaningful account. Other organizations have exited the ILIT business entirely and have partnered with Life Insurance Trust Company going forward. So Life Insurance Trust Company can take over as successor trustee for any ILIT. And the reason why organizations like this model is it can remove all liability, it can remove all cost, it can provide a value-added service to your client, as the policy will be managed by our team of life insurance experts. And once a policy funds, the referring trust organization has the right of first refusal to accept that funded trust back to the organization. It's a very advisor-friendly model. You can still maintain the relationships with your clients once they're at Life Insurance Trust Company. We have an advisor-friendly portal where you could see everything from crummy letters to policy reviews, any communication going out to your clients. So you can still have that transparency to maintain relationships should you decide to move any business to Life Insurance Trust Company. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Hanson.
All right. Thanks, Greg, and welcome all. Happy Wednesday. And we appreciate you all taking the time to join us as we discuss kind of the main issues that we see really around the TOLI space, or trust-owned life insurance. You may hear me say a few acronyms, TOLI or ILIT. irrevocable life insurance trust and the challenges that we see. But as Greg mentioned, we should have some time for questions at the end. If we do not, or if we run out of time and we're not able to get to your questions, we will, one of us, circle back with each of you after this meeting. Before we dive into really the top issues that we see, I wanted to take a look at just some trust stats. And these are really key stats that we see. Starting off with number one there in the top left, the TOLI population is aging. Now, what we see is insureds are aging with the greatest jump, really in that 80 to 90 plus group for those age groups there. I don't think that necessarily is surprising, but that's the reality that we're in. And this really this combination of insureds accounts for close to 25% of the policies that we manage for our trust business. And since life insurance costs generally increase with age, you can see how this is going to create these decision dilemmas really in dealing with these policies, especially in situations where they may be underfunded, and we'll touch on that. When you couple that with health deterioration as the insured age, along with policy failures for various reasons, it can make those management decisions, those policy management decisions, that much more complicated and harder as you move forward. Now, in addition, one of the unspoken issues that we see is that previous activity and decisions made by the previous owners or the previous trustees are now your challenge to manage and ultimately remediate as the current trustee. So there may be, as mentioned here, 3 to 4 decades of history there, and you're going to have several years to unwind, so to speak, and determine what's occurred, or the historic activity for that policy or those policies in that trust, and to address it along with what potentially could be an unhappy client that may not necessarily care that it wasn't your fault, just that you're the current trustee and you need to fix it. So from the ITM perspective, when we look at these averages, we have an idea of what we're going to see anytime we have a new book of business come on, and you as a trustee really can expect around 30% of those policies in your book, 30 out of 100, that are going to need some type of remediation each and every year. And many think that it's just those poorly graded policies that are going to be the ones that need the attention. And while of course they do, and they do get the attention, while they're the initial focus, we know how quickly a highly or an A-rated policy, so to speak, can become a problem policy, especially if there's poor management or previously poor management or lack of proper processes and staff in place. When we look at the remediation side, often that remediation activity occurs with those highly graded policies generally around the premium, meaning that premium is coming due. The client hasn't submitted their gift to the trust, or they're non-responsive, or maybe they just ask, hey, can I skip a premium, or what are my options here? That's generally the most common way we'll see these highly graded policies enter remediation, but it can be too, the premium is late. How does this affect the no lapse guarantee if it's present, or affect the policy? And these questions and these reviewing situations really require the assistance of a life insurance expert to assist. Now, with the next slide here, we're taking a deeper dive into what we call our predictive analysis, based on the collection of data we've filed over the past several years and just overall experience. We see the following as we review a portfolio of life insurance policies here. 25%, about a quarter of all policies are projected to lapse prior to maturity. And we'll get into what maturity is in a bit here. And then to couple on that, 16% of those policies are lapsing prior to life expectancy. And when we look at life expectancy, essentially we're looking at the general life expectancy of the insured. It doesn't necessarily take into consideration the insured's detailed health history. We can go into a more in-depth life expectancy with 21st. But to start, and part of our annual reviews, it is a general life expectancy that we're looking at here. And what that means most often in these cases is that policy is underfunded. So when we look at permanent policies like a universal life or a whole life, you know, a majority of these were issued based on current, you know, or then current non-guaranteed assumptions at that time. And over the last several decades, the crediting rates have decreased, the dividend scales have decreased. You know, the performance hasn't been what it was projected to be. And then you couple that with potential funding changes. Maybe the client skipped a premium, maybe the amount of premium they paid was different. This all plays into the current performance and future, you know, projection when we look at those. Now, when we look at guaranteed products, as shown there in the third bullet, we can see close to 30% of these policies and the no lapse guarantees have been compromised. And when we say compromise, essentially meaning it's decreased. That duration of that no lapse guarantee has decreased from when that policy was issued. Now, that can be changes in premium, because while, you know, it's not recommended that premiums be changed, the guaranteed products are a flexible premium product, meaning that you can adjust the premium. It's just going to move the marker or that no lapse guarantee in essence when those change. Now, can these be fixed? You know, the short answer is yes. You know, it can get relatively complicated with several factors coming into play, but they can be fixed. So while we have 30% that have moved or been compromised, with proper remediation and that's some other factors, they can be remediated. Now, for all policies, I just want to add in as we go along, it's very helpful to have the as-sold illustration along with the copy of the policy contract. Now, it may not be the case or may not be available in all situations, and we'll touch on it a bit with the pre-acceptance process or onboarding, but having that as-sold illustration and that policy along with any historic information on that policy will really help you as trustee to build the file and, you know, kind of that historic continuum of what's occurred with that policy. Now, when we look at policy maturity, as I mentioned here, you know, do you as trustee know what occurs at maturity? And when we say maturity, meaning, you know, when does this policy essentially end? Is it age 95? Is it age 100? Is it age 120, 126? Each policy will have its own specific maturity age or maturity date. What's most commonly misunderstood is what occurs at maturity. And then we look at why is this important? Most generally think that policy becomes paid up, you know, at maturity. You know, if you're thinking of a whole life policy, that most often is the case, it does become paid up. But the key factor that we look for, is there a maturity extension? And if there's a maturity extension, is it for the full death benefit? And why that's important is if that full death benefit maturity extension is not there, there's a risk present that insured could outlive that policy, even if they pay all the necessary premiums to get to maturity. So it's important that you understand that, where to look to find that. It's in the annual policy review that we complete. If you have an in-house reviewer, they should be documenting that as well. But it's important to understand what happens at maturity. Now, the other alternatives are the cash value could become the maturity death benefit or the death benefit after maturity. If that's the case, what is the cash value projected to be at maturity? If you have a whole life policy by design, it should endow at maturity. If premiums have been paid, endow meaning that cash value equal or greater than the death benefit. So if you had a $500,000 death benefit, if you're paying premiums each and every year, you should have $500,000 in cash at maturity. Now, if that extends out as a death benefit, that's great. If it pays out in a lump sum, while that's not necessarily great, it's better than zero, but the issue is it's now a distribution, it's not a death benefit. So you need to know if there's a potential taxable event at maturity. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if there is no maturity extension, if the cash value is minimal, the potential is there that there would be essentially no value, meaning that the client has paid all these premiums, cash value is minimal, there's no maturity extension, the client is left with close to nothing. So those maturity details are very important to know. They're very important to address earlier than later for obvious reasons, but knowing where to find those is important for discussion. Now, when we get into the last two bullets here, we talk about policy loan issues, essentially loans that have crippling issues that could potentially cause a lapse in the policy or a surrender squeeze, which results in a taxable event. Whole life policies by design generally have what they call an automatic premium loan provision, or an APL, meaning that if a premium isn't paid, because a premium must be paid each and every year, unless it's specifically only a 10-pay or a single pay, but those premiums must be paid, and if they're not paid with cash, could be paid with dividends, they could be paid with a combination of dividends and loans, or if nothing's done and that loan provision's active, a loan is taken. And if left to just go on autopilot, so to speak, you could end up with a pretty considerable loan balance at some point in the future. And that worst case scenario would be the policy reaches a point where that loan balance exceeds the cash value. And that's your trigger point for potential lapse if nothing is paid out of pocket and a taxable event. So we roughly estimate about 7% of policies, of the whole life policies, fall into that category. So it's important to keep an eye on those and review what options. And then number 6, that last bullet there, and we'll touch on terms as well, but on average about 22% cease paying premiums out of pocket for various reasons. So if you're looking at a universal life policy, that means whatever cash value is in the policy is being used to support that policy and the monthly deductions. Doesn't mean that the premium, that plan premium coming due, is taken from the cash value. It just means that the monthly cost, the monthly deductions, are being taken from the cash value. Any premiums paid get added to the cash value, and then monthly costs are taken. Now, for whole life policies, there is flexibility there in terms of if dividends are present or built up dividends are present, can go on an offset where dividends pay the premium or some combination there, or policy loans. All can be used effectively with proper management. The important thing is to understand how that policy performs. And that annual policy review that we do, or that your in-house insurance expert does, is key there. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on term policies. Well, it's not part of the bullet there. Term policies account for roughly about 13% of your portfolio on average. And while term policies are the most simple to understand, they also prevent, I don't want to say the highest amount of risk, but they present what I would call an immediate risk, meaning that the premium essentially is your risk. That premium must be paid each and every year. It must be paid on time. There is no buffer, meaning that that term policy does not accumulate a cash value. That premium is paid. That policy remains active for, if it's an annual premium, for that annual year. The other thing to keep in mind with term policies is your conversion option. It's an important feature of a term policy. The tricky part is the conversion expiration date is different from policy to policy, carrier to carrier. So each term policy needs confirmation within the policy contract on what that conversion date is. And that, in essence, allows the insured or the owner to convert that term policy to a permanent product without evidence of insurability. So it's a very, very important factor or feature for term policies, but often misunderstood or just overlooked. Now, I know I went through a lot of information there, but I just want to make sure that we give a baseline for everybody to kind of understand the different products from a high level and the issues that take place on each of those and how that breaks down in your portfolio. Now, when we look at just overall fiduciary duties as a trustee, we start off with number 1 there, managing premiums. Now, the administration trust administration and calibration of that trust system is vital. You know, you might hear me say how important all these things are, which, you know, for everything to work in concert, the trust system and the administration of that trust must be accurate. It must be well maintained. It must be calibrated from the start correctly. You know, that helps you avoid any potential issues down the road, and ensure accuracy and just overall timely delivery of items such as the gift notice, which is your request sending out for the premium to be gifted to the trust, and then ultimately crummy notices for those trust beneficiaries and their right of withdrawal. Now, regarding premium notices in general, when we talk about from the carrier, one of the most common things that we see, or one common thing regarding or around premium notices, is the idea that you must have a premium notice before you pay a premium. And what we at ITM highly recommend is that you do not solely rely on the carrier to send you that premium notice. And you may ask why, and I'll get into that, but really you need to rely in concert with that premium notice, and most importantly, your system, and having a system calibrated correctly, because what we've seen over the last several years is the premium notice not coming. You know, the address might be correct with the carrier. They may have said they mailed it. It may have gone out from their system, but it didn't make it to you. So, and there's other delays that can happen there too with our mail system. And if you're waiting for that premium notice before paying the premium, you're putting yourself at risk if you're going beyond that due date of affecting the policy in a negative way. And should that payment be late, or even worse, just missed altogether, if it falls through the cracks because you're waiting, doesn't come, and it's just missed, now you have a potential issue down the road of missing that premium payment. You know, if it's a permanent policy, you may not completely see the effect of the policy until your next review, assuming you've got current illustrations. If it's a term policy or a policy that was minimally funded, worst case scenario is that policy could lapse. So it's important to have that proper calibration for timely collection, payment of premiums, and then ultimately to finish it with confirmation of premiums, to make sure that those reviews are reflecting that. And at ITM here, we have a team that confirms each and every premium that's paid. We set a marker, roughly about 10 days out for normal premium payments to confirm that they have been applied. Sometimes earlier if it's a sensitive situation, but it is imperative that it's confirmed with the carrier to make sure that your premium, if you send it by check, has arrived and it's applied to the correct policy. We've had situations where a carrier has applied that premium to the wrong policy. So while those situations can be unwound down the road, it's highly recommended that you don't have to go through trying to fix an issue years down the road when you identify that that premium was not applied to that policy. Now, when we look at interaction with beneficiaries, which is a key point in a lot of our discussion today, it really starts with having up-to-date contact information, including your address, your phone, your email. And this stems over to the grantor as well. But the importance of communicating and having up-to-date contact information with trust beneficiaries really starts right there with having up-to-date contact information. Without that, it's going to make your duties as a trustee much more challenging. As far as addressing taxation issues, we get into, from a fiduciary standpoint, from the policy, most often with, for example, a whole life policy. Is it dividends taxable? How do you know if they're taxable? Well, you might receive a 1099, or you would receive a 1099 if there was a taxable event. What steps do you take at that point? I like to look back, or recommend we look back in the file, depending on how far your historic file is, to see were there previous taxable events in any given year. If it's been a recurring taxable event and it's just being looked at now, that's a potential issue there. But remediation or remediate, when you look at options on what's causing that taxable event, or it's the dividends resulting in a taxable event. is a policy classified as a modified endowment contract, or a MEC, you may hear, generally with the whole life and the universal life products. If it is a MEC or dividends are taxable, when you look at, ways to fix, if it's a MEC, there's no undoing a modified endowment contract. Once it's a MEC, it's a MEC for life. Future distributions, which can include loans or depending how dividends are used, can result in that taxable event up to the amount of the gain. Once the gain's gone, there's no longer the taxation there. But just making sure everybody is aware of the potential tax issues. And then you're looking at, how do we limit that? Or can we do certain things to avoid that taxable event? Now, note with the MEC, the death benefit does remain tax-free. There is no issue there. There's some that are intentionally modified endowment contracts based on how they were funded when the policy was issued, and they can go on for the life of the contract with no issues. It's just generally the unknown or the unintentional changes to a MEC status that cause issues. And then we get into the surrender analysis. We're still on the addressing taxation side, but if you receive a request to surrender a policy, we'll get into more details on the options as we look at from the remediation side. But from the grantor and beneficiary perspective, if they request a trustee surrender a policy, and unfortunately it is a familiar, I don't want to know regular request, but we do see it more and more, primarily with maybe a lack of understanding of options within the policy. So the knee-jerk reaction is surrender it, give me the cash value. But you need to have a standard process, and we'll get into the standard processes in place to review all as part of a remediation review. Because once you start to go through all the available options with a life insurance expert, and that can include policy changes, death benefit reductions, life settlement, which is the sale of a policy for the lump, essentially a lump sum payment in exchange for ownership, and that amount is going to be greater than the cash value in the policy now, but less than the death benefit. That's also a relatively, I don't want to say misunderstood, but an unknown option that we educate a lot of clients and grantors and beneficiaries on as we go through. And then we get into the surrendering option. So it's important to go through every single option that is available within that contract, and addressing taxable gain is one. And what we find is most often, once you've gone through those options with the client, with the grantor, with the beneficiaries, they very well may change direction of how they approach that policy. So it's important to have that process in place. And then that leads right into our last area of managing trust assets, because the trust asset for an ILIT is generally the life insurance policy. That is not often the only thing held in a policy, but on average, it is the largest asset in that trust, and it's your duty as a fiduciary to maximize that benefit for the beneficiary without uncontrolled risk. All right. So now we'll move into the 5 mistakes we generally see most often with TOLI trustees, and we'll go through kind of the steps you can take to fix it. And starting off on the next slide here with number 1, failing to understand your responsibility as a trustee and to whom you owe that responsibility to. So in essence, who is your client? Now, is it the grantor that pays the bills, the premiums, the trustee fee? It's easy to think, and they definitely are your main client, because they are your point of contact in most cases, and who you're dealing with. But the best situation would be that your client is the entire family. It's the grantors, it's the beneficiaries. If there's advisors present, they're part of that relationship and part of the decision-making tree, in essence. But the reality is, we most often see trustees thinking that the grantor is their only client. But it's important to understand it is the beneficiary and why that is. If there are issues down the road, it is often the beneficiaries who are coming to you with questions, and they're ultimately dealing with it. For example, why did this, in a worst case scenario, I've got this policy here, this policy contract, why is it no longer active? What happened? I was never made aware. Or why did the death benefit decrease? We see that in situations, for example, if you have a whole term blended policy, that term rider is delicate and can require additional out-of-pocket premium, or could be lost if a dividend is changed in a way that someone didn't do their homework. They didn't have a life insurance expert reviewing. That terminates the rider. So there's a lot of different things that can happen with a policy. The main thing is you don't want the beneficiary coming to you asking, what happened. So your responsibility is to the beneficiaries, as well as the grantor, as they are a client, but your fiduciary responsibility is to maximize that benefit to the trust, primarily with that life insurance policy. Now, when we get into ways of how to fix on the next slide here, we look at education and training, we look at communication. You'll hear me say communication often today, because that's where a lot of issues essentially start. But when we look at education and training from a staffing perspective, just looking at the education and training, regular continuous education and professional development sessions, just like what we're doing here today, can help build and just arm you with enough knowledge to know, okay, I need to go this way, or we need to enhance our processes. But constant, regular refreshing of your knowledge. In addition, you can look for guidance like the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, or UPIA, along with the OCC Unique and Hard to Value Assets Handbook for assistance. And while the link isn't readily viewable there, some of you may have or have seen our TOLI handbook, which is a reference guide for professionals such as yourselves there. And this is available for a free download. If you not have a copy yet, encourage all to download. Michael Brohan, one of our original founders of ITM, was really instrumental in creating this fantastic guide. So if you need assistance downloading, definitely reach out to me or us, and we'll make sure that you get a copy, and it's good to have at the ready. When we get into clear communication, maintaining that clear communication, as I mentioned, you'll hear this often today. It's at the top of the list of many causes of issues. So ensure and request updated information annually to ensure that you have the most current address, current phone, cell phone, and email for all parties, including your beneficiaries and grantors. Schedule your annual meetings to go along with your annual policy reviews is the ideal strategy, meaning that if you have just one policy in the trust and the anniversary is August, once that annual review is updated, your 2024 annual review could take place, or it could take place prior to as well. So it's really a preference there. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a right or wrong, but the important thing is that you're reviewing, the trust and the policies held within and the projected duration. So when we look towards the grantors and the beneficiaries and how involved they have been up to this point, if you're coming into a new relationship, you're starting from scratch. If there's been no recent contact, you're working to confirm the contact information you have on file is accurate, reaching out to start those initial discussions. If you're an existing trustee for many years, and maybe there's a change in the trust officer, looking back and just seeing how communication has occurred in the past. Has it been each year? Has it been by phone or email or by mail in some cases? Just ensure that you understand how it's been done in the past, not to upset the apple cart there, and just ensure that you have all the information at the ready. So, and what I mean by that is have the policy information close by. Take a look at that information, try to anticipate questions. If you're looking at a policy and you see, oh, this is potentially going to lapse in 5 years, you should understand why that policy is in that situation while you're reaching out to that client, because 9 out of 10 questions are going to be, how I thought this policy was paid up, or what happened. So having the historic there to understand what's going on with the policy, or access to life insurance professionals to assist. So just be sure that you're well prepared and try to anticipate those questions as best you can. When we move to mistake number 2, failing to understand the trust document and policy when taking in a trust. Now, this rolls into the pre-acceptance process that many of you have or are familiar with from the ITM side. But in essence, this process should include a review of the trust, that trust document, along with the life insurance policy or policies prior to officially accepting that trust. Now, this ensures you have a good understanding of the trust, the document, and the life insurance policy, and also your client has an understanding as well as part of that discussion. If they're coming to you to be a successor trustee, you have that power to make sure that they understand. It's better to have this done, prior to officially accepting it than after the fact. But just confirming all parties to the trust that need to be included are part of that system. And when I say all parties, there could be a co-trustee, there could be advisors, but you want to make sure those are recorded and at that point. And then lastly, and we'll get into the correcting what you can do, but just understanding the premium funding intentions, meaning are they paying premiums out of pocket? Do they understand how long these premiums need to be paid? Are they going to increase? So forth. Now, what you can do to ensure this is done properly really is part of this pre-acceptance process or onboarding if you're bringing this on, or if it's an existing policy, it's a very similar policy or checklist that you can go through. But the important thing is to do it right from the beginning, as it's crucial to really set up that proper and prudent practices from the start. So when you look at the trust document, what are the trustee provisions? What are the crummy provisions? What are the trust provisions? In addition, is it a directed trust? What's the state law, or what's the tax situs or trust situs? Is there a split dollar agreement? We won't touch on what a split dollar agreement is, but you'll know if there's one there. Most likely there should be included with the trust document. And do you have a complete set of the documents, or are pages missing? It's a little more challenging if you're looking at an electronic copy. If it's 60 pages long or however long it is, to be able to go through and see, oh, page number 23 is missing. But it's important to know that you have a full copy of that trust agreement, any amendments, any split dollars, and so forth. One item I wanted to touch on a little bit with an example is there an investment advisor or an insurance advisor present? Now, like I mentioned, example, we have a current case that we're working through right now where our trust company, life insurance trust company, or LITCO, is trustee, and it's part of the onboarding that we do with LITCO. And what LITCO did when this account came on was properly identifying, is there an investment advisor, which there was in this case, and making sure that it's easily viewable and recorded within the system that you have, because that's really vital for proper administration. And in this case, we have a policy that's underfunded. We have a family that does not have the means to pay the premiums or the increasing premiums. And so the discussion, as it started, were with the grantor and the daughter, who's a beneficiary of the trust, it was quickly noted that there is an investment advisor part of this trust, and we were able to pull them in to be part of the discussion and review those options. So long story short, in this case, life settlement is being pursued, but like I mentioned, the important thing is that we're reviewing all options with all the necessary parties, including the beneficiaries and the investment advisor, and in this case, who also serves as the insurance advisor that makes decisions. So they need to be on board. They need to be part of those discussions, and so forth. Now, when we look at with the trust review, in addition, are there any special notes? Is there a power of attorney? Is there a guardian present? Making sure they just have that proper trust calibration checklist, along with educated staff and sincere staff that understand how to manage that account and that administration, that remediation, and make sure you're starting off on the right foot. Now, when we get into the policy pre-acceptance, they do bleed together a little bit with that trust review, but the policy pre-acceptance, we're really looking at several things from the start. We're looking at, we need a current illustration, we need a recent illustration, meaning within the last 6 months at least. Prefer to have an annual statement or the most recent annual statement. And if we have a copy, or if you have a copy of the policy, of the as-sold illustration, that's highly desirable. Now, if, most often you may just get, hey, here's an annual statement, do a pre-acceptance review. You need to push back, you need to request the current illustration. It can be obtained. It just may take a little work, which the previous or the current trustee or owner may not want to do. But if they know that this is part of the pre-acceptance process, it's required. And really, it's to cover yourself, it's to cover the client, and make sure everybody understands it. So request the as-sold in addition to the current illustration. And when I get into the as-sold, it's primarily, I like to have it because it shows if there was a change in the duration. And you can start from the beginning to show with the client where something may have changed. Was it the non-guaranteed elements? Was it a premium skip or a premium change? So it's just helpful to have it right there to go through, and then ultimately documenting that trust file as part of that pre-acceptance with what we call a statement of understanding. That's giving all the policy details, the duration, any other relative or pertinent information in that document from the beginning. Gives you that baseline. So every year, if you get questions down the road, you can always look back and refer to, recall we discussed this, and it's, documenting the trust file there.
Aaron, we did have a quick question related to copy of the policy. Let's say you take over an ILIT, the prior trustee has no copy of the policy. What do you do then? And then also, I just wanted to mention, we probably got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Regarding the policy contract, like I mentioned, it is pretty common to not have a copy of the policy contract. We do everything that we can on the ITM side for clients to locate a copy of the policy if it wasn't provided. Many banks or older trustees, you may have a paper vault or paper copies of all these files in your vault. To make an effort to go down and scan that policy if you don't have it in your electronic file. But if there is no record of the policy, we go to the carrier, we request a copy of the policy contract from the carrier. They may charge a fee. They may say it's $50 for a full copy of the policy. But that's where I would start. If you're not able to locate the paper file, go to the carrier, request a copy of the policy. Know that there may be a fee involved. You may or may not be able to pass it on to the client, but that's where we start. You can always go back to the insured or the original owner, maybe kind of a long shot that they still have a copy of the policy depending on how old they are, but those are the checklists that we'll go through, and we have a pretty good look at least getting it from the carrier with the fee. Sure. All right, we'll go into mistake number 3 now on the next slide, failing to adequately document a prudent process. I've gone through a few things here already just regarding processes, but as noted, a well-documented process is your key defense against legal scrutiny and disputes. Without it, your job as a fiduciary, as a trustee, becomes very challenging. So where exactly do you start if you're starting from scratch? On the next slide, we talk about how to fix, and really this is a challenging process, but what we like to say is while the outcome cannot be completely controlled, the process can. And again, I repeat that the outcome cannot be completely controlled, the process can. This is your time to implement the process from the beginning, or if you have a current process, to look to beef it up, to enhance it. And we start with number 1, focusing on the beneficiaries, setting expectations. The beneficiaries will be included when discussing with the grantors is ideal. Often the grantor, some beneficiaries we know, they may not even know they're beneficiary of a trust. We see all situations from ITM, or the grantor may say that they don't want them contacted, or they're no longer part of the family. There's a lot of different things that happen with each trust and each family dynamic, but they're still the beneficiary of the trust, need to be included in activity in certain situations. So make sure your contact information is up to date. Make sure they're included as often as possible, especially with policy change discussions anytime the policy death benefit is going to change, essentially decrease, their acknowledgement approvals need to be or should be required. Number two, review of trust documents. I won't go on this as we kind of went through this in mistake number two. But reviewing of trust documents. Number three, understanding the policy. This is a challenge. You know, for a majority of trustees, they don't work life insurance often, doing it on their own or without the assistance of a life insurance professional. Generally is going to be, I don't want to say disastrous, but it's not going to be acceptable for the client. So make sure you have somebody who understands life insurance and that they're involved. You know, it's part of the pre-acceptance process if you're utilizing, you know, a company like ITM, like we do here, to set those expectations from the start. And in situations where you're already the trustee, you know, how are you doing reviews? Are you utilizing a third party, an independent third party for those annual reviews? And if so, how often are you reviewing with the client? You know, utilize that independent, that life insurance expert to assist you here if you don't have something in-house. For developing a review program in number four, this is essentially, you know, your annual review process. If you're unable to do in-house, using an independent life insurance review company to assist, you know, you may be familiar with the base insight reports that we do on an annual basis or something similar. But that review needs to be all-encompassing, include all the policy information details in there. And part of that 5 that bleeds into the review program is just making sure that you're reviewing this annually with your client. Annual policy reviews provided discuss the details on the projected performance. And it also allows you to address any changes promptly. If you're doing this annually, if you're reaching out and discussing with the grantor, this is your opportunity to make sure you have your information updated and you have address changes recorded promptly. Now, part of, on the ITM side, part of our annual review includes essentially an information gathering, you know, sending out to the client, here's your current beneficiaries of the trust, here's the current address, here's the current contact information. This approach has been very successful for us in gathering address updates for clients, for both grantors and beneficiaries. And as you may be aware, some trusts may have 10 beneficiaries, all living in a different area. Put that on the grantor to assist in tracking down updated information. You know, often they're more than willing to say, here, you know, here's their updated address. They're off to college. Here's their email. Yeah, here's their cell phone. So utilize a grantor, yeah, on those annual reviews to help update the information as needed. And number 7, we talked about just informing and keeping those beneficiaries front and center. Make sure that they've got the sign off for any changes and are aware. And then in number 8 here, just creating that central depository. So what that means there is your system. What kind of system are you using? Is it easy to access? Do you have the controls and the risk mitigation tools as part of that system? And that everything there is available. You can access it easy in essence. So.
2 more points there, Aaron. We have 10 minutes left. If we don't have time for questions, when the survey comes out at the end, there is a place to submit questions. We will respond to anyone's questions if we don't have time for them.
Sure. All right, moving to number 4 to get through here, communication. Failing to adequately communicate to both the grantor and the beneficiary. We talked about just communication. It's one of the largest challenges we face, that you face when managing trusts. And effective and efficient communication is the end goal there with all parties. So, you know, each trust dynamic has its own challenges and preferences on how they wish to be communicated with. One trust may be easy to deal with, the next trust, nobody responds to anything. So what do you do? How do you avoid these potential breakdowns in communication, which ultimately lead to issues? On the next slide, we look at how you fix. Just start off with developing the relationship. You know, earn the trust of the grantors and the beneficiaries and be reliable, consistent, diligent as you're going through this information. It starts with having really the right people in place. They have the proper systems and processes, of course, are important, but you need to have the right people in place when it comes to managing the administration, the reviews, the remediation. Even with the best tools, it's a challenge, and it takes time and the ability to prioritize and be organized. So in many cases, like we talked about, you're inheriting previous activity. The client may have been mistreated or neglected in the past. Their longtime advisor may have retired, no longer involved, may have passed away. Life insurance policy may have been mismanaged. So there's a lot of different things that you'll see from the ITM side. We see it all. But we really find success starting with making yourself available, clear communication, and of course, great service, which includes your trust administration, responsiveness to calls and emails. One of the things we hear often is, it's so nice to have someone that's responsive. And I understand, as account loads increase, if you're taking on a lot of accounts, you may not have the ability to reach out, but make sure you're prioritizing and staying consistent and being responsive to those clients. And then you get into the annual policy reviews and the proactive life insurance expert or remediation activity. That's key from us. Being manager of the remediation group is being proactive, identifying potential issues before they become an issue, or popping on it right away as soon as the policy comes on. If there's issues that you see, getting all involved from the start is priority one, because it's much easier to fix an issue now than to wait 10 years down the road when the cash value is no longer sufficient in the policy or the loans have grown. Now lastly, we'll move on to number 5 here as we're approaching the noon hour here. Just failure to analyze policy options when the trust goals change. Now this topic could be an all day long topic if we wanted, but trying to shorten this in here. But looking at the trust goals and how they evolve due to various factors, that includes, the policy is no longer needed. Very common. We'll hear a grantor call in and say, I don't need this any longer. They may no longer want to pay the premiums. Very common. Everybody gets tired of paying premiums at some point or gifting to the trust. Client may be unable to pay premiums, like the example I just went through. Situations have changed. They're no longer have the means to pay the premiums or the means to pay the increasing premiums needed to maintain the policy where it's at. So in these type of situations, it's important the trust beneficiaries are included. But at the same time, we hear that too. The trust beneficiary situations are changed. They are, the client may say, the grantor may say, they're well off. They no longer need this, or I no longer want to support the beneficiaries. So there's a lot of different issues that come in, including the estate tax. We know that the 2024 federal estate tax exemption amount increased to about 13.61 million this year. That's 27 million combined for a married couple, meaning that they can shield up to 27 million from federal estate taxes. So when we look at how many estates will owe a federal estate tax in 2024, it's only going to be 1 or 2 out of 1,000 roughly. But the important thing to note is that the federal estate tax exemptions is supposed to revert back in 2026 to the 2017 amount of 5.49 million with the inflation adjustment as well. So while the need for that life insurance for the estate tax may not be there for many, as it once was when it was much lower, the life insurance policy is still a valuable asset. It may very well be their largest asset in their estate. So it is still a valuable tool. The trust or the ILIT is still a valuable planning tool, and it should be managed appropriately there. So when we look at how to fix that, on the next slide here, it starts, like we talked about, with the annual policy review. That's your baseline. That annual policy review is your baseline, along with your trust document review, but that's not necessarily going to change. Your policy is your changing asset within the trust. Maintaining that consistent communication and being proactive, being flexible. from a remediation perspective. Annual discussions you have with your client should center around that policy, the performance, the funding expectations, and include the policy details. Have someone there with you if you don't have an in-house, utilize an independent third party like an ITM to be available to discuss the policy and the products. I mean, a lot of what we do is educating the client on what they have. Yeah, the policy could be in year 30. They don't have an idea of what it is. They think it's paid up. They don't understand the non-guaranteed elements. So that education part of it really comes into play, explaining it in a way they can understand. Sometimes they don't care. They just want to make sure that the policy is enforced. But most often they appreciate the education aspect of it and making sure that expectations are in line. So we could get into the duration, the death benefit. Is it sufficient? What's the probability that's going to pay a death benefit? When we talk about life expectancy, real short to hit on here, that's a tough conversation for an insured, but talking about life expectancy of the insured with an advisor or a beneficiary is a much easier conversation. They'll understand it. They can approach it on a more personal level with the insured if they need be, but making sure that everybody understands how that life expectancy, how that data point comes into play in terms of funding a policy is important. From the ITM perspective, documentation, making sure that that file is documented with everybody's understanding starts from day one. Starts with the statement of understanding, which is your actionable document that goes to the client being grantors and beneficiaries. And then there's additional types of documents that may be available as well, depending on the situation. But I hope this was a very helpful. It's meant to give you the tools needed to enhance your process, give you a little education. But as we're running out of time here, I did want to get to the question bank, and I apologize if I was a little long-winded, but we'll open it up here, Greg.
No, Aaron, thanks. That's a lot of good information. I don't think we have time for questions, but there is a survey after this webinar. You do have a place to submit questions. We will get back to you. And just a reminder, you will receive an email within 24 hours that'll have a link that you can then get your continuing education credits, as well as a link to download the presentation and the recording of this webinar. Thank you for all your time today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Greg.